Okay, so we added Adams County Technical Institute in the lines where it was provided as to where our students go. It did change from the building principal. It added the building principal or designee shall request and review.
You're talking about the principal of the district?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah, we'll just review somehow my papers got out of order. So that's why I'm like struggling here. I'm like, I don't know what happened to my policies. Usually they're always
Yeah, it's on the last page.
It's on okay, choose. That's why something got mixed up in my policy.
Yeah, it's up here.
Okay, so the superintendent or designee shall post information regarding the district's options for career and technical. So that was a change. And then it does say that in accordance, that we would prioritize maybe based on academic achievement. So the same with our kids, they go through an approval process. They look at attendance, academic records, and all of that. So that would be the same for homeschool students. I apologize, I don't know what happened to my script. That's very odd. Any questions on that? All right, and then going back to 137.2, participation in co-curricular activities and academic courses for homeschool students. The superintendent or designee shall administer, so we did select the superintendent for that. And then same thing, it's based on academic achievement, it's prioritized. So those were the only changes in that section. And that we selected both of those, so that would be the recommendation.
is the committee in favor of moving these 4 policies forward to the full board for first reading this month?
Yes. And I apologize for that.
So I will watch this next part here. At the June 16th meeting, we're going to get into a little bit of parliamentary procedure to suspend the requirement that a policy go through 2 readings to be finally approved for 2 policies that are time sensitive in nature. This month, and they cannot meet until August 4 for so Tom will take us through the reason why policies are time sensitive and we need that special exception.
So, policy 615, I don't know how much you want to go in depth with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll just say, essentially what it boils down to, yes, it is a timing issue. Changes.
Yeah, 615 basically provides some limitations for payroll deductions, and we recently, there are some things that we need to be able to do to update what payroll deductions are provided. So this is a favorable change for our teachers association and our employees that we have. So we will be doing that. There will be some more information coming to the full board at the next meeting in executive sessions for some information that will be in the phone content.
So this is favorable for the
It's favorable for both parties.
education system, okay.
The district and the teachers.
Yes, okay.
I guess 610, well, so 610 was subject to recent corrective action under our cafeteria of lacking specificity in its policy, and some changes, there were some thresholds and added some criteria that we were required to do the corrective action. So that's something we're forced to do, and that would have to circumvent that kind of policy time for meet the corrective action requirements.
I like, I don't know, something's talking right now, but with the board representation for this, I think it was helpful when you went and you were part of the food service, information. And because I'm not on the finance committee with the whole bus talk, I'm wondering if maybe things would be going smoother or maybe happening a little bit quicker if we had board representation on there as well, to be a part of that, since we're the ones that have to vote, so we kind of know, from the beginning to the whole process, how things work. It would be to answer questions. Wondering if we can, this probably wouldn't be the place for that, but getting, we can do something about having board information, board representation. Well, I was sharing is, it was helpful if we had a board representative when we went, and we worked with Chartwell's, yeah, RFPs. And I'm thinking, I'm assuming, I don't know, that we don't have a board member on.
I would say it could be administrative regulation that we follow. I wouldn't say that would be in the policy that we have a board representative. It just be something we follow.
Yeah, so that's something that.
Just a recommendation that we follow.
Our board director for needing to get administrative.
Would we can maybe wish to implement that into, hard and fast things, some type of language that could be like the board is entitled to have representation during bid and RFP processes.
Yeah.
To be appointed by the president of the board. Judy-
Or somebody that would like to do it, be interested, like you would.
Would you just do volunteer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Barry is the permanent representative.
Well, no, I'm just saying. Yeah. Is that where we would have to change that?
Well, we can do some research and look into whether that's an administrative regulation or if that's just a practice that we deploy. And we do in the board's request to make sure that any RFP that we have moving forward, that's something that we bring out as part of the process. I don't necessarily know that it needs to be a policy, because as we go through, it's a simple communication that I have with board and board leadership of selecting something.
I mean, pretty much the same.
Yeah, and we didn't have
Well,
regulation for that.
and part of us, like, we trust the administration to, like, with the whole, picking a couple different
Yes.
things. I don't think we need to be in all of that,
No.
but maybe the final conversation with the person or the company that's chosen
Understood.
to be a part of that, maybe.
Yeah, I think the regulations, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but I believe that some of the regulations that we had with our food service management company that we had to, when we put the RFP, there are more strict guidelines for that. And one of the things was a requirement to have a board member be present on that committee.
It was a requirement we had to have a minimum of 3 people. So I chose to do 4 to have 1 more, and then I chose to include a board member so they were abreast of the change since we had so many new board members. So it was just something I chose to do as a.
With the timeline and deadline of the RFP for transportation, that I did not ask Tom to reach out, so we didn't even think about that for a board member, so I think moving forward, we can certainly make sure that we do that.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, and I understand, we trust you all to implement what the will of the board. Policies outlive people that are in chairs that are all there. And I think maybe putting that policy would ensure that future boards get the same representation that we would wish and that we know that you guys will provide to us, but that future administrations will provide the board with that type of courtesy. So I might lean towards putting, again, not something that ties everybody's hands, but something that is inclusive of the board's interest in that. Because I think it would be helpful.
Well, I think, like, and I know I'm going back to what the previous meeting was, but there's just so much information that, that your committee would have maybe missed out on. I don't know the details. But having to, anyway, I think it would just be beneficial to have somebody there.
So,
Not like, I wouldn't say be in on like the negotiations with the three different, like with, if, we bring up the food services again. Not to be in all 3, but maybe if there's a, the negotiations with the person that's chosen, coming in and being a part of that conversation.
is
Well, you did, you were part of that. There was a couple, right? You guys went to Chartwell's? Or was it, had they
So-
already chosen Chartwell's and
Yeah,
you were
so
part of
the-
that negotiation?
Yeah, the process that Mrs. Brennan went through was, we designed the RFP, much like we did for transportation. We received bids and presentations of the bids, and what was part of that? Part of that was a free-facing, just a conversation, just a presentation to understand what they would do. Mrs. Brennan was part of that evaluation of the rubric. When we went back to any negotiating, that would be Tom and I working through the negotiating process. So one of the benefits
Right.
that would happen if we would have had this with transportation is we could have had the presentation of everything, and we could have gotten into specifics with a board member that would sit with us, evaluate and go through it, and then that board member would have had that information in advance, and comments that Tom would have still negotiated with the comments.
That's correct. We could, so the board member, in this case, Mary, in this case, was part of the evaluation team, but the delegation of any contract negotiation was Tim and I to negotiate that on behalf of the board. The board, there was a representative in negotiation talks.
Okay.
But Mary was in talks of what we wanted, the board would want to negotiate or change, and we would do that ahead of time, so we had some of those questions figured out. But it was still delegated to Tim and I to do that. Some of that's a time constraint.
Yeah.
Coordinating with the board members to make sure they're available and time to
Sure.
get back and forth conversations that happen with negotiations. And we all have board meetings sort of somewhat.
That's a great idea, absolutely.
I don't disagree with them going in the evaluation process. This, sometimes the negotiations run long and get tedious time.
So would the committee be okay with me working with Judy on some language to add to that policy?
Yes.
To be on review for the work session?
Yeah.
Put that in. Good, the payroll deductions, 615 and 610 purchases subject to bid, getting a special exemption, being on, if the policy is suspended, so we need 6 members of the board. In order to pass it, we need 6 members of the board to vote to suspend the 2 policies, and then we need a majority to approve the 2 policies.
Yeah.
So we're going to push that forward. And then, Judy, we have 2 attachments for this.
Thomas has 2 attachments.
Oh, yeah, Tom has
So
2.
just the one.
Okay, I will take them.
So within that same corrective action was an update of our federal procurement, specifically the attachment portion. So with anything with PSBA, we know we've had some kind of lapse with PSBA and missed out on some years of. So some of that is what was attributed to the corrective action. We were clean up, these technically weren't in the review cycle due to the corrective action we had to kind of work through that. So with this instance, it's an attachment, it doesn't go through the review in a different fashion, but what we had to do is remove a lot of the thresholds that were handicapping or required us that needed to keep pace every year. We'll remove all those to follow current PSBA guidance and language, but just follow the federal guidance, which is kind of the essence of this, and then adding a little bit more around food service in particular. That was part of the corrective action. We had a policy, we had regulations, it just wasn't thorough enough to meet their standards, and that was our corrective action, to make it more robust and more, allow them removing those federal stipulations and just saying, follow it to our best practice and establishing Judy and myself as those delegated responsibilities. So that's what the essence of that attachment is, changing the system.
Questions on that? Are we good with moving that attachment forward?
Yes.
And does that have to be a first reading or a second reading?
I don't think it's.
An attachment, I don't believe it does. The policy's already there, this is just the guidelines.
To say the policy itself is good, but attachment was not robust.
But aren't attachments to the policy technically part of the policy?
I will verify, let me give this list a call.
Appreciate it. Attachment number 2.
So attachment number 2, you've heard Dr. Naylor and I talking about developing a records retention plan. And we would attach the records retention plan to 2 different policies. So it would be attached to policy 216 and policy 800. And It really just, so we use guidance from Saxon and Stump as well as surrounding districts, because there's a couple of areas where it was LEA decision, like you would have the ability to say, we're gonna keep something for 5 years or 7 years or something like that. So we pulled a number of different districts around us and went with the majority, and well, actually, they were all in a line, so they must have done the same thing. So what we did then is went down through, and when you are able to pull this up, since our internet's down again, you will see that, like, it took us a number of different sessions, because it's a very lengthy document. It goes through a lot of our business records, our student records, payroll, cafeteria, like just a whole barrage of different things. So you'll see where, if it was a requirement by the state or Saxon and Stump about like legalities of how long we had to keep something, those are the years that are in there. And then anything that was like an LEA decision, we went with what other people around us were doing, which a lot of those seem to be like around 6 years. So again, when you review that document, it's pretty robust, but it gives us guidance, especially as we begin to move and merge buildings. We have so many records. I think Carrie's working to set up a shredded date for us. So once we have this attachment approved and we know which records we can shred that are outside of the scope of our years that we're saying we're retaining them, we can start getting those shredded. The other stuff then we can get uploaded into a document system where we can save it.
Questions on that? In favor of moving forward as well?
Yeah.
Any other business to be brought before the committee?
Since we're talking about policies, I had a couple of questions on the, I guess, well, it says 210 USDA policy, medication. We had discussed and approved previously the EpiPen and the puffers for inhalers that were able to be with the student, especially the inhaler. As long as it's in the backpack, they can have it pulled out when needed. This doesn't really specify that. So I'm thinking, yeah, this, it's from the policy manual. It just gets a little confusing because I'm thinking maybe we should specify somewhere in here that that is an exclusion.
Because I believe that the policy is talking about having an attachment that has, there's 500 that says attachment.
It's in the,
Is that the one?
Yeah, I believe that's in the hands of, and I can't pull it.
I can
But I believe we would have an attachment, so you just want to make sure it's specified that it's permitted and it's allowed. Is that correct? Yep.
But also under delivery and storage of medications, it says all medications shall be brought to the nurse's office or the main office. So again, should that be a caveat that?
So we can take a look at that, but my interpretation of that and the board's interpretation could be that, yes, that medication has to come in, you have to provide that documentation to the nurse so that she's aware and you know that inhaler is in your bag. So she does manage all of the medications that come through and manages the policy to make sure students have them and they don't have them. Are you following what I'm saying?
So it doesn't mean that if, let's just say Janelle comes in and I have to carry an EpiPen or inhaler with me, that I have to give that to the nurse. I just have to go check in with her and let her know I have it, and then
And the
documentation comes
Yeah,
off.
and not every day, not every
Correct.
day.
Yeah, just
It's
beginning of the
the
year.
Beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Or when
So
those orders come in.
that helps us make
It's
sure we
210.1.
manage
What's that?
210.1.
and that they
210.1.
compliance with our policy.
It says that.
Okay,
Mary, do you have 210? It looks like it's under 210.1.
Right.
no, well, I don't, I just pop this one off.
That's about
because
self-administration.
Right, self-administration.
Is that the one that's on the agenda
Yeah.
for this
It was,
month?
yeah, because it was on the meeting, I didn't get to come.
Because there's this attachment here that
Health administration.
Maybe it is.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Not mine, did it?
But I have one more.
So you want them to be able to do what?
She wants to, I believe, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak for her.
Administer in the classroom themselves, period.
Because
Ensure-
that's what we came up with previously.
Right. And you don't think that the policy has enough specificity?
Well, I mean, he's saying there's a attachment, which I didn't look at the attachment yet, but some of it gets a little, like this, further on, it says the student shall notify the school nurse immediately following each occurrence of self-administration of medication. Well, if, say my granddaughter is giving herself a puff of inhaler because she has breathing issues, does that mean she has to go to the nurse every time and say, hey, I just took a puff of my inhaler? That's kind of counterintuitive, yeah.
Well, that's a good question, because we would want to also make sure that since the students are minors and we are their parents, if your granddaughter's taking a hospital medication in your home, I would imagine that you would want to know that she's doing that, or see that she's doing that, and she can do that. I think it would be,
And she knows.
I would think it would be the same process, simply keeping the nurse informed of any administration of any medication, just to make sure, again, that nurse has the responsibility of administration of medicine and welfare for all the students and the staff of that building. So she has a really tremendous job to help assist with that.
Could we have it be that the teacher, like says the nurse email or something, that Sally?
That communication takes place, we could figure
Some
out
type of
some wording
communication.
out all.
Yeah, that's what, my main thing is, like, why would they have to go to the nurse's office every time?
If they didn't have to go there, they could, just like.
Right.
Because it says the student shall notify the school nurse immediately following each occurrence of self-administration of medication.
That does sound that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So
That
we
it could be just the.
Teacher or student.
Teacher.
Yeah, I mean, we could say teacher or student, because let's just say a teacher can send an email, but if the student's coming in from recess and it's going by the nurse's office, you know, that they can pop in.
Yes, I would say in a very, let's say, just a possibility could be that if something's wrong with a inhaler and the student, like, it's out and the student doesn't realize that it's no longer a medication, they could be putting a whole bunch of puffs together and it's not medicating them. We would want the nurse to know that, so the nurse can have a valid understanding of, oh, this child needs medication and this is out, we need to do something else, what do I have available? So communication with that nurse would be very vital and important in situations like that.
Yeah, because I think maybe like older students might be okay with knowing and understanding that, but I don't know